Hi everybody, this is Rabbi Rubenstein. Nice to see everyone here again today, learning the beautiful Torah of the Baal Shem Tov from the Hasidic and Kabbalistic masters of our tradition in order to inspire us and wake us up to a life that's more meaningful and more woke. The Torah we're going to learn today is really interesting and goes over a part of Jewish law that is well known, at least for rabbis. It comes into play often. And he takes it, the master, and opens it up and examines this idea from an inner dimension, and specifically of how it helps us to relate to God within all of the different times in our lives. So we're going to look at this Torah today. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you get something out of it. Please, again, you can follow this recording on iTunes podcasts. You can listen to my YouTube channel in order to see these videos at a later time, if not on Facebook. But there's so many ways to learn, and what's most important is to engage and for your heart to open up to Jewish wisdom and godliness in your life. So the Baal Shem Tov begins, HaKadosh Baruch Hu nikra ish, shehu ish milchama, v'Yisrael nikra'in isha. And this is the idea that God, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One, is called man, that he is a man of war. And the Jewish people, Israel, is called isha, or a woman. Now this comes from a verse in the Song of Songs, chapter 15 of Exodus, the song the Jewish people sing after seeing their Egyptian oppressors drown in the sea, in the Red Sea. They sing a song in chapter 15, and one of the ways they use to describe God is Adonai Ish Milchama, Hashem Ish Milchama, right? That God is a person of war. And although I think this understanding is a little strange to picture God as a man of war, what the Baal Shem Tov wants to take from this verse is that we see that sometimes the Torah calls God man, and that also in other times the Jewish people is related to a woman. The most famous time in rabbinic literature we see this is in Song of Songs, which in Jewish literature is seen as the love story between the Jewish people and God. God is seen as being the man, and the Jewish people as being the woman. Now, I want to pause for a moment because I understand that so many of us have trouble seeing God as a he, and I want to make 100% clear right now that the Kabbalistic tradition and Jewish spirituality does not necessarily see God as a he. Actually, the Jewish mystical tradition sees God as having and containing within God's self both genders. Right? And the Kabbalah deals a lot with gender, masculine, feminine attributes, traits. But what's clear is that God has both. And what's even more interesting is that also within each human person, the Jewish mystical tradition believes that there are both female attributes and female ways and male ways of being within both all kinds of humans. So just because the Baal Shem Tov is using example or quoting an example from the Torah here in which ish is used doesn't mean that necessarily the Torah thinks that God is a man. But let's get deeper into what is being said here. It's written according to the Baal Shem Tov, V'zeu shekatuv, ha'isha nikneit levaala. That's written in the Gemara in the Talmud, that a woman is married, right? The actual term here is acquired. But we like to say now married, right? This is an old way of thinking, but really it's now all marriages. And she is married by her husband, and the husband does three different things. And this is according to, again, 2,000-year-old traditional Jewish law here, that a woman is married to a man by the man doing three different things. And so what is this Mishnah talking about, this part of the Talmud talking about here, according to the Baal Shem Tov? It's not between two humans, it's between God and man. And what we're going to see is that these three things that we're about to learn of what they are not seen as something really as much having to do with physical things, but rather spiritual matters. Now, the three things, first we have to learn the Torah in a revealed way, in a more simplistic, in a more regular way that we would if we were learning it from the Talmud, is that a man is married to a woman, and unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because, again, it's 2,000 years ago, marriage was controlled by men. And just as it was in every other society at the time. Men would have to give something to the woman. And of the three things that were given, either was, in Hebrew, kesef, shtar, or bia. Kesef means money. In a simple sense, you have to give something. If you give something of value with the intention to marry and betroth that woman, that means you become betrothed, right? Engaged. The second thing is shtar, or a certificate of some sort, right? Well, what we do now is the ketubah, right? So the ketubah would be the shtar, our contract, some kind of written thing saying that we are going to be betrothed to each other, or finally, you can have sex, right, with the intention of becoming married, right? So either of these three ways, if we do them with the intention of being married or being betrothed to each other, that, according to Jewish law, functions as becoming married. Now, of course, a lot of times the money in a marriage ceremony, then that's used, that's the ring, right? So the ring has to be a valuable metal in that regard, and that's how that is done. Now, this is a commonly known piece of Mishnah, a piece of Talmud, but what's going to really happen is the Baal Shem Tov is going to open this Torah up in such a beautiful way that I've never thought of before. And beyond his ideas of how he's going to try to use this as a way of mapping out our relationship with God, the Baal Shem Tov happens to also take away some of the problematic parts of this Mishnah for moderns, especially for feminists, or at least alleviate it somewhat. Again, do I know the Baal Shem Tov was trying to do this? I don't know. But it happens to have that he's doing this, which is very, very interesting. So let's get into it. Bekesef. Melashon kisufim. V'cheshet. So what the first language is kesef, which literally means money. But there is another way. Again, every Hebrew word has multiple meanings to it. They're such old words, and they have such meaning behind everything. There's one Hebrew word, and then it'll have so many different meanings. So kesef, usually it means silver or money, but it also can mean kisufin, which is to long for, to really desire in one's heart. Kisufin, like longing for a loved one. And what the Baal Shem Tov is going to show us now is that these three ways of getting married is not about getting marriage between one human and another human. It's the marriage between a Jew and his maker, the Jew and God. So bekesef, this is the aspect of chesed, biyamei chesed. This is the aspect of loving kindness, in the days of loving kindness. Sheva HaKadosh Baruch Hu Misayo, bechasto hagadol. And these are the times of loving kindness, when God helps us and gives us loving kindness and inspiration to come close to God. What I would say in our language is we're feeling it, right? This is when God gives us something, when we really have this cheshek, I would say, this desire, this real want to come close to God, to be close to God in our lives. And it's not like we don't really have to work for it. It immediately comes to us. We want to daven, we want to pray, we want to learn sacred wisdom, we want to do acts of loving kindness, we want to do mitzvot, we want to draw closer to God, we want to bring justice to the world. Those days in which we feel really good, when we feel like being close to God at that moment. Those are the days of chesed, right? You know, what I would call, you know, first year of marriage, right? You know, those the honeymoon period, I'd say, when we really, you know, there's no work involved in the relationship, right? You just want to be close to each other, whatever it is. And this is, again, God giving us this gift, and God, as of course being the prototype of the man in the story, giving the gift of chesed, of loving kindness to each other, creating this atmosphere and giving the gift inside of each Jewish person's heart to really desire sacredness in their life and desire holiness in their lives and desire meaning in their lives. Right? That's what he's saying here. So he continues on here and says, and I love that God is helping us and God is aiding us in that kindness. So when we feel good and when we have days of goodness, it's really God giving us that really is a gift. That doesn't come necessarily because of our hard work or whatever it may be, but it's God giving us a gift at that point. So whenever we do feel good, or whenever it does come easy to want to draw close to God, to want to have spirituality, to want to have those kisufin, or those longings to be close to God, those are a gift from God. So we should just be excited in itself that we have those kisufin, or we have those longings that the Baal Shem Tov is talking about. And what is happening, Vaz Kosef v'choshek umit lahev b'torato v'avratayit barach, that we should really long for and desire and be enthusiastic, like a flaming enthusiasm for God's Torah and the service of God, and becoming close and walking in a spiritual path, that we really immediately feel inspired and moved by this idea of being close to God and really walking a spiritual path and connecting to God. And this is called in the Kabbalistic literature Gadlut, or greatness, bigness, right? Real bigness. V'achar kach nistalekse, and sometimes afterwards, and sometimes a lot, every time, right? Afterwards, always at some point, nistalek mizeh, this flies away, it goes away. V'nikra yemei hakatnut, and these days when this feeling, when this natural feeling of emotion and love for God that we just live with, which is great when it happens, we know that doesn't really last forever. It does go away. And these are called days of littleness. And this is also called this way in Kabbalistic literature too, katnut, littleness. V'gam einu kosef v'choshek, and he doesn't really long for or desire for God, or she doesn't desire or long for God at that point, right? We don't have those feelings of love. We don't want anything to do with God at that moment, right? We don't have any feelings in our heart maybe at that moment. We just want to have a good time, or we want to have some alone time without God at that point. We don't want to be with God at that point. Mikol makom al tzad hechrach tzarich ledabek atzmo b'shtar shehem otiot haktuvim b'sefer shnikra shtar. In any case, we are obligated at that moment to cling ourselves to the shtar, to the certificate. So remember, there are 3 ways in which a Jew gets married. A Jew gets married in by way of money, kesef, and we already learned the inner dimension of that word, which is kisufim, or longings. So one way we keep our relationship with God is during these good days when we feel really good and we really want to connect to God, right? Kisufim, longings. We feel those natural longings for God, which we learned according to the Baal Shem Tov is a gift from God. It truly is a gift. But on the other hand, since we're in a marriage with God, right? This is not like, we can't just leave our relationship with God, right? We're married. The Jews have a covenant with God, right? We are in a very serious relationship. We still need to cling to God even when we don't feel like it. And how do you do that? How do you get yourself to cling to God at the point when you don't feel like it? You get close to the star, right? You get close to the contract or the certificate, right? In marriage, this would be the ketubah, right? You have to go back to the terms of the ketubah, right? Now, what are the terms of the ketubah? What is our ketubah with God? It's the Torah. It's our sacred wisdom. It's our mitzvot. And by learning Torah and by being involved with sacred wisdom, just like you are all doing right now so wonderfully, right? It always is an anchor that ties us back to God, that we can always pop open our book or just turn on Facebook nowadays and go on Facebook Live or hear a podcast or whatever you're doing and get closer to God. And thank God we live in a generation today where we have more access to Torah than we ever have before. There are so many media forms, so much of our sacred text is translated now. It really, if someone wants to do this, they can. They can grab on, and when we really grab on to the text of the Torah and the text of our sacred writings and really grab on to them and use them in our lives, they are an anchor that pulls us out of that darkness, of that grayness when we don't feel like having holiness. By opening up and just looking even at it for a little bit of time, by spending a moment, we can really soak it in. And what he says, which is so beautiful, is to cling to the letters themselves, that the letters themselves of the Torah have some holiness to it that helps us to cling to it. And he also mentions this within tefillah too, with prayer, right? We Jews are very unique. We daven from a prayer book, from a siddur, and we're very close to the words in which we're davening from. Why? Because sometimes, and a lot of times, we don't feel like praying. We don't feel like talking to God or praising God. And certainly if we do, we don't necessarily know what to say. So what the Siddur acts as a spiritual anchor, as a place in which even if we're lost and we're caught in the tidal waves, in the stormy waters, that the letters and the words of our Siddur, of our prayer book, they're so strong and they're so chazak, they're so beautiful, they're so holy that they can bring us back if used in the right way with the right intention. So even in those great times, that we can come back through our holy prayers and our holy Torah. And what's really important is that each person find their own path to be engaged with this somewhat, to really have this in their life. They're in their own way. This is very, very important. And what's, I think, most important about what he's saying here is that this is also in the gray days, the days when we don't feel like it. We shouldn't wait until we feel like seeing God to try to build a relationship with God. Rather, at every moment, we're obligated as Jews to live holy lives. It's Parshat Kedoshim this week. It's not like only when we feel like it, right? Because God is holy, so too we should be holy. So in the great times, what is going to get us to do righteousness? What is going to get us to do goodness? And what is going to connect us back in love with that God again is really looking and being a part of the Torah and really soaking in divine wisdom and trying to open up that Siddur. Try even just saying one word of prayer. There's a great simple prayer we can say. Mo da'ani lefanecha melechai v'kayam shechazarta bi nishmati bechemla rabba emunatecha. I acknowledge, God, that I am standing before you. Thank you for having faith in me and restoring me to life. Right? That you have faith in me even in my darkness. It's one sentence, and by just saying that I acknowledge, God, that I understand that I'm standing in front of you at that moment can be a very strong moment. Just even if you don't feel like it, grab onto one sentence, one word, shalom or whatever prayer, sim shalom, a phrase, make peace, peace, right, from the Siddur. And that can act as an anchor to get us back into that relationship with God that we so crave, which is to have that meaning, to live a life with meaning and a connection to something internal and transcendent in our lives, which is our destinies, the Jewish people. And he says, Ad sheyachzor achar kach lihitaneg bo al yedei sheba'u amochin b'Torah u'tefillah shenikra bia. So afterwards, then, because we do this, because we're involved in Torah and we're involved in prayer and all these things, even in the great times, they will help us to return us to again have oneg, to have pleasure again, to have joy again in being close to God, and again will connect to the mochin, to the divine energy and the divine influence and this wonder, the divine wisdom that is found within our holy writings and our holy prayer book and our holy prayers. And what this is called, according to the Baal Shem Tov, in such a beautiful way, bia. Again, strictly translated to sex in the Talmud, but literally means bia comes from the verb to come closer to something. So to come closer. So what is coming closer? It's the divine energies, the divine effulgence is coming closer to us and connecting to us through the vessels of Torah and Tefillah, through learning sacred wisdom and prayer. We should always have an anchor that connects us back to God, right? Because what we're trying to do is really, and what's important in a spiritual life is to create a mature relationship with God. It shouldn't just be a relationship that's, we feel in the good times, maybe when we're hiking on top of a mountain, or we're, maybe witnessing the birth of a child, or these really, really holy moments, or maybe even on Yom Kippur, right? When we really feel like the closeness of God, and we really feel like we're witnessing a miracle. That's wonderful. That's great. And what I would call those is Yemei Chesed, right? Those are the days of Chesed. And the Baal Shem Tov is saying that's an important part of a relationship with God. But what he's also saying is that there's also great times. And what's most important really is what we do during those great times. How do we sustain a relationship with God during those great times? And what the Baal Shem Tov advises us to do is to fill our lives with sacred wisdom and our siddur, our prayers. and schedule that on a regular basis, right? That's why in Judaism, the sages have obligated us to try to pray 3 times a day, right? It's not to punish us, right? It's not because I don't believe it's because, and not because we're going to get punished or something if we don't, but because by being part of that spiritual exercise, by forcing ourselves to open our mouths in prayer and try to have a moment of connection with God, even when it doesn't work, there's going to be a point where it will work and will return us back to God. And 3 times a day, we have a chance, even if we're in the darkest or grayest time, for bringing us back to God and having that moment again of biyah, of connection, of coming close, which really has real pleasure, and this is about the combining of God and man together, right? And having God dwell in this world, in our lives, in each one of our souls. And a last note, which is really interesting, I think. One, this also obviously has to do with human marriage as well, right? We can't just only be married in the good times, right? We have to figure out how, as marriage partners, of in the great times, how are we going to stimulate the romance again? How are we going to get back and feel that love again? And every partnership has these moments. Maybe it's about going out or doing something special together, or going back and remembering really what created this partnership and what this partnership is all about. Have sacred texts as a relationship. What is the Torah of your relationship with a partner that you might have, right, or someone you might love, or what would be the prayers of that relationship? It's an interesting thought to have. And lastly, there is a feminist aspect of this as well, in that these are tools we see here that yes, everything is given to us by God, but it's something that I would say is in the control of the female here, which is man, which I guess is the same way in the Talmudic analogy as well, right? They're gifts from the man that are given to the woman to use, right? The ring, something of value, and also the contract. So the ketubah and the contract is actually owned by the woman. But regardless, as the woman, at least in this allegory, right, we are to use these things in order to bring us back into relationship again, right? That they are meant to keep the relationship alive, even in those dark times. That it's both partners who have to work. God gives us the gifts, but we as the Jewish people have to utilize those gifts to come back to God. And God will constantly give us those gifts, but we have to constantly use what I would call that spiritual technology, those gifts, in order to return to a life of Kedusha and holiness. I hope this was really meaningful to you. I hope you have a really wonderful day, a day connected to God, and I look forward to getting to talk to you soon. We'll probably come out with one more podcast or Facebook Live video before the end of the week. Please, if you have any comments, please send me a message, subscribe to me on the iTunes podcast, leave a review, leave a rating. Thank you so much in advance, and I enjoyed teaching and learning with you today. Bye now.